Vincent Carrington, one of the wealthiest men in New York, was looking for a new maid. He needed someone to work in his house, someone efficient, discreet, who knew their place. He was tired of people who, no matter how qualified they were, seemed to want to be more than just part of the backdrop of his life. Vincent liked to have control over everything around him, and hiring a maid was just another way to maintain that control. It was at a small employment agency that he found Eliza. She was 30 years old, but her appearance made her seem younger due to her shy and simple demeanor. Her brown hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore plain clothes, typical of someone who didn't have much choice in the matter. Eliza wasn't sure what to expect from the meeting, but she knew she didn't have many options. Money was tight, and for her, any job was an opportunity to improve her life. When she entered the agency's office, she was surprised by Vincent's gaze. He was sitting behind a large desk, dressed in a flawless dark suit, with a slightly arrogant smile. The way he looked at her made Eliza feel small, but she didn't show it. She was already used to being judged by others, especially the rich. "So, Eliza, you have experience with cleaning, right?" Vincent asked, his voice smooth, but with a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir. I've worked in a few places, small houses, apartments. I've always tried to do my job right," she replied, looking at the floor. She didn't want to seem nervous, but she couldn't help it. "Do you have experience with large events?" Vincent asked, with a mischievous smile, as if he already had an idea of what the answer would be. Eliza didn't know what to say. She had never worked at anything as grand as Vincent's house, but she knew that if she was called, she would do her best. "I can learn, sir. I'll put in the effort," she said, with a slightly firmer voice. Vincent studied her for a moment. He wasn't interested in someone who was just adequate. He wanted someone who would accept their place, stay in the background, and do the work without questioning. He leaned forward and spoke with a subtle smile. "You have a good presence, Eliza. I like that. I'll hire you. You start tomorrow. I'll need you to take care of my house and eventually, for events like the one I host every now and then. Are you willing to adapt to whatever is needed?" Eliza, surprised by the quick decision, didn't know what to say but couldn't miss the opportunity. "Yes, sir. I'll do whatever is needed." Vincent didn't seem to care about how excited or insecure she was. He was used to controlling everything in people's small reactions. He made a simple hand gesture, signaling that the matter was settled. "Perfect. See you tomorrow then." Eliza had no idea what to expect when she arrived at Vincent Carrington's mansion for the first time. The grand house, in the wealthiest neighborhood of New York, looked like a castle. The massive wrought iron gate seemed insurmountable, and the immaculate garden looked like something out of a luxury catalog. The cleaning company's car, modest in comparison to the cars parked on the street, stopped in front of the entrance. Eliza felt a knot in her stomach, but kept her composure. When the door opened, a butler in a suit greeted her with a slight bow, then guided her to the back door, where she would be met by the support staff. The scent of the house was fresh, the atmosphere sophisticated, and the walls adorned with expensive artwork. Everything seemed perfect, tidy, controlled. Eliza couldn't help but feel like an intruder, but she masked her feelings and tried to focus on the work. Vincent appeared shortly afterward, as if he already knew exactly where to be. He was dressed in an elegant dark blue suit, his hair perfectly styled. When their eyes met, a slight smile appeared on his face. "So, Eliza, let's see what you're capable of," he said, his tone not exactly welcoming but more of an expectation. He always seemed to be looking for something that would prove she was up to the task. The morning passed in a series of simple but demanding tasks. Cleaning furniture, tidying rooms, and finally, Vincent made a point of personally instructing her on what he expected from her for the upcoming events. He seemed delighted to give orders, but also seemed to want to ensure she didn't get too comfortable. "I want you always alert, Eliza," he said, while she polished a grand wooden table in the dining room. "The house needs to be perfect. Things need to flow without me having to say anything. You understand, don't you?" Eliza simply nodded, trying not to show the pressure she was feeling. She was used to working, but never for someone as imposing and demanding as Vincent. The way he spoke to her, his cold tone, made her feel constantly under surveillance. At the end of the day, when she was preparing to leave, Vincent called her again. He was in his office, the lights dim, glass of whiskey in hand. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if every movement was being observed. "Eliza, you're a good worker. I want you to accompany me to an event next week. I'll need you as part of the support team," he said, without much enthusiasm, as if he was just going through a formality. "It's going to be a big party. I think you'll do fine, as long as you don't make any mistakes. You'll be by my side, serving guests, organizing the environment." Eliza, surprised by the invitation to the event, responded with a shy smile, trying to hide her anxiety. "Yes, sir, I'll be ready. I hope so." "Don't disappoint me, Eliza," Vincent said, already looking back at his computer as if the conversation was over. "See you there." Eliza left, but couldn't shake the growing weight she felt. A party. She had never worked at such a big event. She knew it would be challenging, but she couldn't turn down the opportunity. She needed the job, she needed the money. When the day of the party finally arrived, Eliza felt like a whirlwind of emotions. She knew this would be the event that could define her place in Vincent Carrington's house. It was her chance to show herself, to prove she could handle a large event and the pressure of being surrounded by rich and influential people. But at the same time, the fear of being judged and not measuring up to that world made her anxious. The invitation Vincent had extended to her, although it seemed like an honor, also carried a huge responsibility. Eliza knew Vincent was relentless when it came to her work, and she couldn't fail. She was willing to do whatever it took to impress him, to keep the job that, despite everything, gave her stability. She woke up early, preparing with the best she had. The outfit she had bought for the event was simple, but elegant enough not to look out of place. When she arrived at the mansion, she was immediately greeted by one of the house staff, who led her to the kitchen where the rest of the team was preparing. The other staff, in their impeccable uniforms, exchanged curious glances. They knew Eliza was new and had never worked at an event of this type before. Eliza's anxiety only grew when she saw the other employees, their experience evident in their faces and movements. It was as if she was an outsider in this world. She was quickly assigned to the cleaning and organizing part of the venue, the role Vincent had given her. She was there to ensure everything was spotless, that the guests had whatever they needed, without being noticed. Eliza understood her role, but Vincent's constant presence in every corner of the house made her feel like she was being watched all the time. He walked through the hall with his arrogant posture, chatting with guests, making offhand comments, while his eyes occasionally swept over her, evaluating her performance. The party was in full swing when Vincent approached her, with a cold, impersonal look. He was surrounded by some important figures, discussing business and laughing with friends, when suddenly, he stopped beside her. Without warning, he looked at the floor and said, "Eliza, the dining room floor has some stains. You're not going to let that happen at a party like this, are you?" Eliza swallowed hard. It wasn't just a simple stain. She looked around and saw all eyes on her, waiting for her reaction. She felt the heat rise to her face, but had no choice. She couldn't fail. Without hesitation, she grabbed the cloth she had in her hands and knelt down, starting to clean the floor with her party dress. Her dress, simple yet elegant, soon touched the dirty floor. She knew this moment would be one of the most humiliating of her life, but she couldn't do anything. She had to do the work. She had to go unnoticed, do everything right. As she crouched down, the guests snickered, exchanging looks of disdain. Vincent, from a distance, watched without showing any sign of remorse. He seemed to enjoy watching Eliza being forced to clean the floor while everyone around her was in formal attire and having fun. "That's right, Eliza," Vincent said from afar, his voice sarcastic. "Never forget your place." She felt a wave of anger and humiliation, but tried to maintain her composure. The pain of being treated that way, being exposed as nothing more than a servant, hurt deeply. But inside, a decision was beginning to grow. She knew this moment couldn't be the end of her story. Like this, Somehow she would have her revenge. The party continued. But for Eliza, time seemed to stop. The shame consumed her, but a flame of determination began to ignite inside her. She knew that this event, this day, was a turning point. The suffering she was going through would somehow be repaid. The night was at its peak. The sound of upbeat music filled the halls of the Carrington mansion, and the laughter of wealthy and powerful guests echoed through the space. To everyone there, it was just another fancy party, a celebration of luxury and prestige. But for Eliza, every passing second felt like torture. The feeling of being watched, judged, of being treated as inferior, consumed her. She wanted to disappear, but she couldn't. She was there to fulfill a task, and at that moment, it seemed that the only thing left for her was humiliation. Vincent walked around the house with his arrogant posture, surrounded by guests, talking, laughing, and drinking, but no matter how much he was at the center of all the attention, his eyes were always on Eliza. She couldn't understand what he wanted from her, why he treated her so cruelly, but he always watched her, sometimes with an almost imperceptible smile, other times with a colder look, as if he enjoyed her distress. Soon after the incident with the dining room floor, Eliza tried to compose herself. She couldn't let on how devastated she was, how the pain was becoming unbearable. But Vincent seemed unconcerned. He kept provoking her, humiliating her in subtle but cruel ways. At one point, when she was in the kitchen, organizing the dessert table, Vincent appeared again. He was with a group of people around him, and they all seemed to hang on every word he said. When he approached Eliza, the tension in the air became palpable. "Eliza," he began, his voice low and provocative, "these desserts need to be more beautiful. You don't want my friends to say the house service is poorly done, do you?" He looked at her impassively, as if she were just another fixture in his house. "Let me see. Show me how you can improve this." Eliza swallowed hard. She knew what he wanted. He was enjoying this, testing her limits, making her feel more and more inferior. She didn't want to fail again, so she arranged the desserts as best as she could, her hands trembling, trying to avoid any mistake. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about the dessert. It was about the control Vincent had over her, the pleasure he took in seeing her suffer. As she arranged the tables, the guests' gazes became more and more uncomfortable. Some watched, others whispered, but none of them came over to talk to her. They were all there to have fun, to socialize, to admire Vincent. But no one seemed to see Eliza as anything more than a worker. She was in the background, a mere ornament. It was as if she were invisible, except when Vincent used her to demonstrate his power. But the worst was yet to come. At the final part of the party, when most of the guests were already drunk, and the loud music filled the room, Vincent, who seemed more entertained, gave an unexpected order. He approached Eliza again, now with a serious face, and his voice tone made everyone around him fall silent. "Eliza, it looks like the entrance floor is dirty again. We can't let that slide in my house. Go over there and clean it now." She looked at him, surprised and humiliated. Clean the floor? During the party? With all the guests around watching? But she had no choice. The weight of being treated as if she were there only to serve, to do the dirty work without question, was overwhelming. She couldn't rebel, she couldn't refuse. She went to the entrance, where the guests were still circulating, and knelt down in her delicate dress, already marked by the effort of previous tasks, scrubbing the floor in front of everyone. The murmur of conversation stopped for a moment, and Vincent's gaze, standing from afar, watched everything. His smile was almost imperceptible, but there was something in it that Eliza could no longer ignore. He was enjoying this, taking pleasure in her humiliation. As she bent down, with the wet cloth in her hands, she felt the pain of the words and the situation. But deep down, there was something more, something that was beginning to grow inside her, a feeling of revolt mixed with an immense desire to leave, to escape this scenario. She didn't know how she would do it, but she knew she couldn't go on much longer. The looks from the guests were like a cold knife, cutting her dignity into pieces. She was there, kneeling, dirty, while Vincent walked around the party with his usual confidence. The humiliations she was suffering seemed endless, But a part of Eliza knew this wouldn't be the end. Something was about to change. Revenge hadn't come yet, but she could already feel it was imminent. The night finally came to an end. The guests started to leave, still talking about business and gossip, while Vincent said his farewells with his usual arrogance. Eliza, exhausted and feeling as though the weight of the world was on her shoulders, retreated to the back of the house, where she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. But at that moment, when silence finally took over the mansion, Eliza had the feeling that her life was about to change forever. 4 years had passed since that night at the party in the Carrington mansion. Eliza never imagined that day, full of humiliation and pain, would become the foundation for everything that would happen later. But now, she was no longer the same person. The weight of that night had been transformed, shaped into something new, a silent strength, a desire for revenge that, for so long, had been kept hidden in her heart. In the years that followed, Eliza managed to distance herself from that cycle of humiliation. But in a way, no one, not even she, could have predicted. During that time, she not only worked hard, but also studied, rebuilding herself with a clear purpose. One day, she would have control over her own life. She would learn everything she could about Vincent Carrington's world, his businesses, his flaws and weaknesses, and she did. In the past year, Eliza had gotten involved with a network of investors and entrepreneurs, studying and working tirelessly to build a future for herself. She became an expert in finance, using her ability to understand the markets in a way most people couldn't. It was with this in mind that she began to look at Vincent's businesses, the company he had created, the Carrington Enterprises empire. Vincent Carrington was still a powerful man, with a considerable fortune and an unbeatable reputation. His name was still synonymous with success, but Eliza knew that his company was starting to face difficulties. The economy was changing, and despite the facade of success, Carrington Enterprises was beginning to succumb to the pressure. There were financial leaks, bad investments, poorly made decisions. Eliza saw her chance. She knew that to achieve her goals, she would need to be cautious. It wasn't enough just to attack. She needed to be strategic, patient. Instead of simply trying to destroy the company, Eliza made the decision to infiltrate it, to make Vincent himself, in some way, responsible for its downfall. The first step was to build a network of contacts within Vincent's own company. She approached mid and high-level employees, listening and observing. She knew that to understand how Vincent's business worked, she needed to know its flaws from the inside. Over time, she became a key player in the restructuring of part of the company, offering strategic advice and helping to navigate the crisis. No one knew she was involved. But Vincent started noticing changes in the results, improving finances, and avoiding major collapses. He had no idea that behind these improvements, Eliza was manipulating the situation in her direction. Then, during one of the most critical moments for Carrington Enterprises, Eliza made the final decision. Vincent was on the verge of making a major business decision, a risky move that could determine the future of his company. He had invited investors to an important meeting, where he would make a proposal to save the company. But that day, he had no idea that Eliza had already prepared the scene to deliver the final blow. She appeared, casually, as a consultant who was in the right place at the right time. The meeting took place in a conference room, with the main investors and top executives of Vincent's company. Everyone was eager, ready to hear Vincent, who seemed to have complete confidence in his proposal. Eliza, with her usual calmness and a confidence Vincent never imagined she possessed, took the decisive step. During the meeting, she made a silent presentation with precise financial data, showing that, despite Vincent's promises, the company was on a path to ruin. She exposed strategic weaknesses, bad investments, wrong decisions that could easily be corrected, but if ignored, would lead the company to bankruptcy. Vincent was stunned. He looked at the documents she was presenting with an incredulous expression, unable to comprehend how Eliza had access to such information. Their eyes met, and it was at that moment that he realized she was no longer the humiliated servant from that night, but a woman who knew what she was doing, someone with power in her hands. The investors, with Vincent's proposal now in ruins, began questioning him. Doubts began to grow, and soon Carrington Enterprises came to be seen as a company on the brink of collapse. Eliza, with the silent support of other investors, had already started the movement to take control of the company. Vincent, desperate, tried to react, but it was too late. The confidence he had in controlling everything was shattered by the person he thought he had defeated. The fall of his company was swift and relentless. The investors who once followed him now abandoned him, while Eliza, with her intelligence and patience, took control of the majority of Carrington Enterprises shares. In the months that followed, the company's restructuring was completed. Eliza became the new CEO of Carrington Enterprises. But what made her feel most victorious wasn't the position, nor the wealth she acquired with it. It was the simple fact that she had turned the tables, that she had transformed the pain of that night, that humiliation, into her greatest strength. Vincent Carrington, in turn, saw his fortune dwindle. Without his allies, without the support of those who had blindly followed him, he lost everything. His company was bought for a fraction of its value, and he was left behind with nothing. As Eliza sat in her new office, in Vincent's former mansion, with a view of the city, she knew she had won. Not only the battle against Vincent, but the fight against the humiliation that had once put him in control of her life. And as she looked out the window, with the future finally in her hands, she knew she had achieved something much greater, her freedom.